Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving deep into one of early Christianity's most intriguing figures, James the Just. You know, his whole life was kind of a manifesto, a radical statement through something as simple as his diet.
Yeah, it's fascinating. James wasn't just any historical figure. His vegetarianism was like a rebellious act, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Now, let's break it down. James, who was Jesus' brother by some accounts, wasn't only a church leader later on, but early on he was modeled after a Nazirite. He didn't drink wine, didn't eat meat, and even let his hair grow long, sort of living as a prophet of old. He really made his diet a statement about holiness.
And that's such an intense way to challenge the norms of his time, especially since the temple was practically running on, animal sacrifices.
Absolutely, yeah. In a world where the temple economy thrived on these bloody sacrifices, think thousands of animals being slaughtered, taking a stand by refusing meat was, almost like a direct protest against that whole sacrificial system. It was more than personal purity. It was a theological denunciation of corruption.
So, can we say that James was, in a way, saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice? It's pretty bold, considering how intertwined animal sacrifice and religious practice were in those days.
Oh, for sure. It's like, um, you see, by not participating in the system, he was also taking a stance against not only the temple's corruption, but also the Roman excess that
Yep.
came with it. It was a sort of a call for a purer, more ascetic form of devotion.
And then there's the comparison with Paul. Paul preached that all foods were permissible, right? So there's a real, almost philosophical clash.
Exactly. For Paul, commands around food were secondary. It's all about the freedom from the law. He had that all things are lawful vibe, which was, more about personal liberty. However, for James, diet was central. It was like every bite was a declaration.
Hmm.
You could say that his vegetarianism was a full-on identity marker.
It's interesting because for James, these dietary restrictions were not just for show. They were a rejection of the sacrificial traditions that funded the temple's priesthood. That's like undermining the state apparatus through your lunch, right?
Haha. Yeah, it really is. And then we get into these comparisons with other groups of the time. Think about the Essenes. Those folks dealing with their own rigorous asceticism. They, too, rejected meat and wine as a pathway to purity.
Right.
It makes you wonder if James was more in line with that kind of radical asceticism than with the more mainstream, rule-breaking freedom preached by Paul.
Exactly. And then you have the Ebionites, who looked up to James even more. They preserved this tradition of a meatless lifestyle as integral to their belief system. It almost makes you ask, was the original message of Christianity paved in abstinence rather than indulgence?
That's the mind-blowing part, isn't it? There's even the provocative idea that the Eucharist might have been invented as a vegetarian alternative to slaughter. Instead of sacrificing animals, you replace that with bread and wine, a symbolic meal that stands in for the old, bloody rituals. It's like swapping out brute force for a refined ritual of remembrance.
Wait, but don't you think that interpretation might be stretching it a bit? I mean, the shift from sacrifice to symbolic ritual could be driven by many factors.
That's a fair point. I mean, some scholars argue that the shift in ritual might very well have been more about practicality and appealing to a broader, more diverse community. But still, if we consider James' revolutionary lifestyle, his vegetarianism could have been a foundational element that influenced such symbolic practices. It's a provocative, if controversial, thought.
Right. And you see how later church authorities seem to deliberately downplay this radical image of James. They elevated Paul's ideas and erased much of the hard-edged, ascetic vibe that James exuded.
Yeah, the effort to rewrite history here is staggering. Later, church narratives paint James as a more subdued, conciliatory leader, a mediator rather than a rebel. But if you look at sources like Hegesippus and others preserved by Eusebius, they make it clear. James refused wine, meat, and even shaved. He embodied a commitment that was, well,
Absolutely.
uncompromising. It shows how history can be reshaped by those in power.
And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If James, the brother of Jesus, was this ascetic, vegetarian prophet, then what does that say about the original vision of Christianity? Were its roots more about radical abstinence and moral reform than about indulgence and power?
Exactly, it flips the narrative. You look at Christianity's evolution, from a movement of resistance with elements of profound personal discipline all the way to an empire embracing opulence and indulgence. In James's case, every meal was a protest, a stand against both temple corruption and Roman excess. It paints a picture of a very different early church than we usually
Yep, that's
imagine.
really something. And thinking about it, his lifestyle parallels what we see in other secret movements too. Those that stand in opposition to mainstream, often oppressive systems. It's like his diet was his personal act of civil disobedience.
Right. It's almost like, if you think about modern movements, you see individuals turning to minimalist living or ethical diets as statements against industrial society. James was doing this in his own way, with like a deep theological underpinning. It was a lived philosophy, an everyday rebellion.
And that narrative, that early Christianity could have been more about ethical living and resistance, challenges so many assumptions we have today about religious traditions.
Exactly. It indicates that, the very underpinnings of Christianity, the avoidance of bloodshed in ritual, a call for mercy over sacrifice, may have been embedded from the start. What a revolutionary thought!
Yeah,
It suggests that the early church's identity was formed in the crucible of intense moral and political strife.
But here's a puzzle. If such a radical version of Christianity existed, why did later leaders choose to bury it? Sail it away with the more flexible, law-free gospel that Paul promoted.
That's the million-dollar question. In many ways, it's about power and control. The later church, seeking to consolidate authority, might have found it easier to adopt a message that promised freedom in everyday matters rather than one of strict and, perhaps disruptive ethical demands.
Yep.
It was about crafting a narrative that would be more acceptable to, say, an empire.
It's, like they rewrote history to suit their needs, transforming a figure who was once a radical prophet into a respectable leader, a mediator rather than a rebel.
Yes, and that rewriting has long-lasting implications. It not only changed how we view James, but, may have also reshaped early Christian identity as a whole, moving it away from its contentious ascetic roots. And it's compelling because it forces us to reevaluate what we think we know about the origins of our traditions.
So, if we think about James the Just as a vegetarian icon of rebellion, his whole life stands as a testimony to a path that, in some ways, was sacrificed, no pun intended, for a more palatable version of Christianity later on.
Precisely. And it's, not just historical curiosity. It's a window into the power struggles of belief and the transformation of religious identity over time. His dietary choices weren't just personal. They were profoundly political, a rejection of the established order. Every bite he refused was a strike against a system that had become corrupt.
I mean, it really makes you, stop and think. If our present-day traditions are based on, compromises made centuries ago, what truths might we be missing out on?
True, it does nudge us to question the narratives that have been handed down. Sometimes the forbidden knowledge, as controversial as it is, can illuminate aspects of our history that remain like hidden under layers of reinterpretation or outright suppression. It makes one wonder how many truths were intentionally muted.
And this discussion, while it might make some uncomfortable, is important because it challenges us to think critically about the evolution of belief systems. It's not just about the literal food on the table. It's about how ideas get transformed, or even, dare I say, sanitized over time.
Exactly. It's like re-examining the ingredients of a long-lost recipe. In this case, James's radical diet may have been a crucial flavor in the original unadulterated message of the faith, a message that later got, diluted by political maneuvering and the quest for broader appeal.
Yep.
That's powerful stuff.
And yet, despite the later efforts to erase his fierce stance, the evidence is still there in the historical texts. The calloused knees from constant prayer, the refusal to partake in ceremonial indulgences, it's all a window into his uncompromising lifestyle.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a provocative question. What if Christianity's roots were not in indulgence and political alignment, but in something radically different? A call to purity through abstinence, standing firmly against the status quo.
Really
It
thought-provoking.
makes the story of James the Just both a revelation and a rebellion.
Truly, and it gives us a fresh perspective on the origins of our own beliefs, reminding us that what we see now is just one version of a much more complex historical tapestry.
Right, and it's, a reminder that sometimes uncovering these hidden layers requires us to look beyond the official narratives and question what's been taught. James's life, his dietary choices, his radical rejection of common practices, stands as a testimony of that very struggle. It challenges us to ask,
Exactly, yeah.
what would have happened if that radical ethos had prevailed?
It's, definitely food for thought. I mean, here we are, thousands of years later, still grappling with these foundational ideas and wondering how alternate histories might have reshaped our culture.
Absolutely. And, if you're finding this exploration eye-opening, if it's making you question the roots of tradition and power, then share this conversation, spread the debate.
Right, indeed.
Because sometimes the most transformative insights come from questioning the status quo.
Without a doubt, it's a call to look deeper, challenge what we think we know, and, maybe even, in some way, reclaim that original revolutionary spirit of early belief.
Well said. And remember, every bite, literal or metaphorical, can be a protest against compromise. Thanks for joining this deep dive into a truly fascinating chapter of history.
Thanks, everyone. Stay curious and keep questioning.